Hello students, welcome to the English class. Today I am going to continue with the same chapter, that is The Birth, written by A.J. Cronin. This chapter is a very interesting one as it begins with Joe walking towards his home after having an unpleasant time with his girlfriend Christine. Upon reaching home at around midnight, he finds Joe Morgan outside his house waiting for him. Joe and Susan had been expecting a child, and upon reaching, Joe tells Andrew that he is too anxious to be going inside. So Andrew walks inside the house alone. Then he realizes that there is still some time left for the child to be born. And Susan's mother, who is a wise but is tensed at the moment, offers him some tea. And while Andrew is sipping his tea, he begins thinking about his girlfriend and he recalls how his friends too are having a hard time in their relationships. On the other hand, he feels that marriage is meant to be something peaceful and cheerful. Thus, he finds himself in a conflict, and Susan's mother tells him how worried Susan is for the child because the situation is complicated. Then, now we are going to read further what happens next in the story. So, further in the next line, it is said that his thoughts were heavy, muddled. The episode he had witnessed at Cardiff station still obsessed him morbidly. Morbidly means in an abnormal and unhealthy manner. He thought of Bramwell, foolishly devoted to a woman who deceived him sordidly. Sordidly means very meanly selfish or self seeking. Sordidly of Edward Page, bound to be the shrewish Blodwen of Denny, living unhappily apart from his wife. His reason told him that these marriages were dismal failures. It was a conclusion which, in his present state, made him wince. Wince means make a slight involuntary grimace or shrinking movement of the body out of pain or distress. So, he wished to consider marriage as an idyllic state. Yes, he could not otherwise consider it with the image of Christine before him. Her eyes shining towards him admitted no other conclusion. It was the conflict between his level, doubting mind and his overwhelming heart which left him resentful and confused. He let his chin sink upon his chest, stretched out his legs, stared broodingly into the fire. He remained like this so long, and his thoughts were so filled with Christine that he started when the old woman opposite suddenly addressed him. Her meditation had pursued a different course. So, here in these lines, the word idyllic means like an idle or extremely happy, or peaceful or picturesque. Resentful means feeling or expressing bitterness or indignation at having been treated unfairly. And broodingly means preoccupied with depressing, morbid, or painful memories or thoughts. So, in these lines, it is said that clearly the earlier unpleasant moments with Christine had taken a toll on his mind, on the mind of Andrew, and he was still being haunted by the incident that took place at Cardiff station. He began thinking of his friends and acquaintances who have had bad experiences in love and marriage. He thought of Bramwell, the woman he loved and had cheated on him, and he contemplated upon the relationship of Edward Page, who was committed to a dominating woman named Blodwen. He reflected upon how Denny is living away from his wife, not so happily, and all of this thought brought him to an inference that made him cringe, and he wished to believe that the institution of marriage was a cheerful one that guaranteed peace and companionship. He also had no other reason to believe otherwise, with Christine's shining eyes in his mind. He was undoubtedly facing a conflict with all his mind, heart, and soul in disagreement. He thus rested his chin on his chest and pulled out his legs while he glanced at the fireplace. He sat still for a few moments, and his mind was still preoccupied with Christine until the old lady broke her silence. She was thinking about something else. So, who was thinking? The old lady. That means Susan's mother was thinking something else. While and as there was a little bit time in the birth of a child, so Andrew, while taking a sip of tea and resting, he just thought of his girlfriend Christine, whom he had you can say a fight with her, and then he started thinking of all his friends and acquaintances whose relationship have not worked, or who is just forced to live with the partner. So of all these thoughts he just made a conclusion that the institution of marriage was a cheerful one and it guaranteed peace and companionship to a person. So then the next line says Susan said not to give her the chloroform if it would harm the baby. She's awful set upon his child, Dr. Butch. Her old eyes warmed at a sudden thought. She added in a low tone, we all are, I fancy. He collected himself with an effort. It won't do any harm. The anesthetic, he said kindly, they'll be all right. So, in these lines, the word awful means very bad. So, then in these lines it is said that the old lady, she, that is Susan's mother, tells the doctor how worried Susan was on account of this complicated situation, the complicated birth of a child, and she even refused to have anesthesia if it were to affect the baby. And she told him how invested she was in the child, that how desperately she wanted this child. The old lady corrects herself and says that all of them are invested in the child. That means all of them are anxiously waiting for the birth of a child after so many years. Her eyes, the old lady's eyes were filled with warmth while she said this. The doctor, who was preoccupied with another set of worries, somehow cleared his mind and assured the lady that the anesthetic would do no harm to either of them. That is, it would not harm either the mother or the baby. Then the next line says, here the nurse's voice was heard calling from the top landing. Andrew glanced at the clock, which now showed 3:30. He rose and went up to the bedroom. He perceived that he might now begin his work. So in these lines it is said that suddenly they heard the voice of the midwife calling upon them. So when Susan's mother and Andrew were downstairs and Susan's mother was providing the doctor the tea and was talking to the doctor in the meantime, they both suddenly heard the voice of the midwife calling upon them. Then Andrew saw that it's already 3:30 and that he shall begin with the procedure. Thus he got up to go to the bedroom upstairs. Then further it is said that an hour elapsed. It was a long, harsh struggle. Then, as the first streaks of dawn strayed past the broken edges of the blind, the child was born lifeless. So, blind here means a screen for a window, or especially one on a roller or made of slats. So, it is said that it took him almost an hour to perform the surgery. So Andrew now knew that the time has come and it was already 3:30, and then he performed his surgery and he took 1 hour to do so, and it was a rather very tough time, and the surgery was also a very tough one. While the first rays of daylight came inside from the corner of the window, the Morgan child was born. But unfortunately, the child was cold and still. That means it was not moving. You all know that when child is born, the child starts crying. So, but the child who was born to Susan Morgan did not cry, and the child was completely cold and still. There was no reaction of the child. Then the next line says, as he gazed at the still form, a shiver of horror passed over Andrew. After all that he had promised, his face heated with his own exertions, chilled suddenly. He hesitated, torn between his desires to attempt to resuscitate the child. That means, resuscitate means to revive someone from unconsciousness, and his obligation towards the mother, who was herself in a desperate state. The dilemma was so urgent, he did not solve it consciously, and blindly, instinctively, he gave the child to the nurse and turned his attention to Susan Morgan, who now lay collapsed, almost pulseless, and not yet out of the ether, upon her side. His haste was desperate, a frantic race against her ebbing strength. It took him only an instant to smash a glass ampule and inject the medicine. Then he flung down the hypodermic syringe and worked unsparingly to restore the flaccid woman. Flaccid is who is now lifeless. After a few minutes of feverish effort, her heart strengthened, and he saw that he might safely leave her. He swung round in his shirt sleeves, his hair sticking to the damp brow. So, in these lines, the word ether it is the kind of an anesthetic, and haste means excessive speed or urgency of movement or action. Frantic means conducted in a hurried, excited, and disorganized way. Ebbing means gradually decreasing, and unsparingly means generous. Placid is lifeless. So, in these lines, it is said that as Andrew continued to look at the lifeless child, a shiver passed down his spine. He was getting worried, as he had promised Joe that he would save his child. So, while his face was heated because of the efforts he put in, a wave of coldness held him. He was devastated. Moreover, he was confused. He couldn't get himself to choose between addressing the stillborn or the miserable mother. Now, he was not able to understand whom to attend first, because both of them needed her attention, needed the doctor's attention, that is Andrew's attention. So, he was not able to decide whom to attend first. So, then finally, the doctor decided to save the mother. Then, afterwards, he would see to the child. So, now he couldn't get himself to choose between addressing the stillborn or the miserable mother, and he could not make the decision consciously. So, he intuitively addressed the mother first while giving the child to the nurse. He gave that child to that midwife, that nurse who was standing over there, and instinctively he attended the mother, that is Susan Morgan. Then Susan, she laid unconscious too, because of the effect of anesthesia still persisted in her body. And then the doctor put in all his efforts to bring her out of the desperate state, even while her strength continued to weaken. And then the doctor instantly broke the medicine's glass to fill the syringe and inject it into her body. So, just to revive the lady, that is Susan Morgan, doctor, he wanted to revive the ebbing strength of the lady, so he injected a medicine in her body. Then he worked tirelessly to bring her to her senses. He was trying to bring her back to her senses to make her conscious again. Then, after a moment, when he was assured that Susan was safe and her body was beginning to regain its strength, then he turned his attention to the child. and his hair, the doctor's hair was all over his sweating face. But he did not waste another moment and he attended the child, as the child did not react when he was born and he was cold and still. So now the child needed the attention of the doctor. Now you see that how the doctor saves the child, whether he was able to save the child or not. So further, then further it says, where's the child now? Now the doctor asked for the child. The midwife made a frightened gesture. She had placed it beneath the bed. In a flash, Andrew knelt down. That means he just knelt down, that means he just sat down on his knees. Then, fishing amongst the sodden newspapers, sodden is the word sodden here means saturated with liquid. So, fishing amongst the sodden newspapers below the bed, he pulled out the child. And it was a baby boy who was perfectly formed. The limp, warm body was white and soft as tallow. Tallow is the hard fat of animals that is melted and used to make soap or candles or etc. So, the cord that was attached to the mother's womb, hastily slashed, lay like a broken stem. The skin was of a lovely texture, smooth and tender. The head lolled on the thin neck, and the limbs seemed boneless because it was a small child. So he was very soft and his body was still warm, but the child did not react. He was stillborn. Then, so in this line it is said that Andrew, he hastened for the child and asked the midwife to hand him over the child. And the midwife got very anxious and asked him where the child was, as midwife had kept it under the bed. Without wasting another moment, Andrew took the child out, and it was a boy in a perfect shape and with flawless skin. So the midwife, thinking the child to be dead, she just pushed the child under the bed in the middle of the newspapers. So now Andrew just took the child out from those papers, those the papers which were saturated with liquid, especially the water, and then he started attending the child. Then the child's body was warm and his skin was extremely soft, and the head of the child hung loosely on his weak neck. You all know that when the child is born, the neck is not stable. So, therefore, the head of the child hung loosely on his weak neck, and the cord also was hanging too from his body. The cord, because the cord, when the child is born, the cord is cut just to detach the baby from the womb of a mother. So now the child's limb felt boneless because the bones were very, very soft. So it seemed as if there were no bones inside the body of the baby. Then further, the next line says, still kneeling, Andrew stared at the child with a haggard frown. Haggard is what? Looking exhausted and unwell. The whiteness meant only one thing, asphyxia, pallida, and his mind, unnaturally tense, raced back to a case he once had seen in the Samaritan, to the treatment that had been used. Instantly, he was on his feet. Get me hot water and cold water, he threw out to the nurse. And basins too. Quick, quick! But doctor, she faltered, her eyes on the pallid body of the child. Quick! He shouted. So here asphyxia is a condition arising when the body is deprived of oxygen or causing unconsciousness or death or suffocation. And pallida is suffocation or unconsciousness condition caused by the lack of oxygen and excess of carbon dioxide in the blood. And faltered is to lose strength or momentum. And pallid is the pale, typically because of poor health. Pallid is the pale face of a person, typically because of the poor health. So, in these lines, it is said that still now the doctor was bent to take the child out from beneath the bed. Andrew glared at the child and he observed him and thought about the reason he was so white. Then he knew it could only be a case of oxygen deprivation because he had seen a similar case in Samaritan, which is a place where he had worked, and he focused on the treatment that was used. And then he quickly remembered what the doctor gave the treatment to that child. Then he instantly stood up and instructed the nurse to bring in hot water and cold water in separate tubs. The nurse hesitated because for the moment she thought the efforts were useless because she thought that the child was dead. But the doctor hastened and shouted on her to get it done instantly. And the doctor did not want to waste even a single minute because he could not take any chance with the child. Then further, snatching a blanket, he laid the child upon it and began the special method of respiration. The basins arrived, the ewer and big iron kettle. Frantically, he splashed cold water into one basin. Into the other, he mixed water as hot as his hand could bear. Then, like some crazy juggler, he hurried the child between the two, now plunging it into the icy, now into the steaming bath. So this is now the another method of respiration which he just remembered was given in such a case. So in these lines, the word ewer means a large jug with wide mouth, and plunging is falling steeply. So in these lines, it is said that while the nurse had gone to take what he told her to, he was asked to bring. Andrew grabbed a blanket and laid the child on it, while he performed the unique respiration method. The nurse arrived with the necessary items and he began with the procedure instantly. In one basin, he put cold water alone, and in the other, he put hot water at the temperature that he could bear. Then, the next moment, he was seen dipping the child in those basins one after another, and he continued doing it. So, this is all for today. In the next class, we are going to study that, or we are going to read further what happens whether the child was saved or not. Thank you and good.